Olivia Carter sat alone in a cozy corner of the quaint downtown cafe, her fingers lightly curled around the warm ceramic cup of black coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, but it did little to calm the growing tension in her chest. Dressed sharply in a tailored blazer and crisp slacks, she looked every bit the accomplished architect that her reputation suggested. At just 30, Olivia had built a name for herself in the cutthroat world of urban design, respected, disciplined, and precise. But despite her professional success, her personal life was an unspoken ache. She was now on her 98th blind date, set up once again by her endlessly meddling mother, who insisted that her daughter was running out of time, and tonight's candidate Mark Ellis, son of an old family acquaintance who had just returned from years abroad. Olivia glanced at the clock. He was late. Not by a few seconds, but by several minutes. Normally, she would have walked out without hesitation, but leaving now would only mean another lecture from her mother and another empty seat at the next family gathering. When Mark finally arrived, he was all apologies and excuses about the city's traffic. He wore a generic blazer, smiled too quickly, and tried to cover his tardiness with forced charm. Olivia, exhausted from weeks of long work hours and emotional fatigue, forced a smile and stayed seated. As the conversation dragged on, she quickly realized Mark was just another polished facade. He was more interested in flaunting his travel stories than listening. It wasn't until he received a suspicious phone call and stepped outside that the illusion completely shattered. Curious and uneasy, Olivia followed him discreetly to the cafe entrance, only to overhear him arguing with a woman on the phone, his wife. The conversation was crystal clear. She was demanding money for rent and groceries, while he made vague excuses and asked her to stop calling. Olivia's heart dropped. Every word hit her like ice. Married with kids. Another liar. Another waste of time. Without hesitation, she confronted him. Her voice was cold, her eyes fierce. Mark stammered, trying to weave a pathetic excuse about separating for the kids, but Olivia wasn't having it. She cut through the lies like a knife told him never to contact her again and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Her mind was reeling, her emotions raw, as she drove through the city streets, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. A cocktail of anger and humiliation churned inside her. Why did this keep happening? Was genuine honesty that rare? Her mother's words, the pressure to settle down, the endless parade of disappointing men, it all pressed down on her like a weight she no longer wanted to carry. By the time Olivia reached the edge of town, she realized how far she had driven in a daze. The bright lights of the city had faded behind her, replaced by quiet streets and scattered roadside stalls. Her stomach grumbled, a reminder she hadn't eaten since morning. Spotting a small fruit stand with a modest display of bananas and oranges, she pulled over. An elderly vendor greeted her warmly, and Olivia welcomed the quiet simplicity of the moment. As she handed over money for the fruit, a light tap on her shoulder made her turn around. Standing before her was a man in worn, patched clothing. His shoes had clearly seen better days, and his face carried the weight of exhaustion. But his deep brown eyes held a kind of honesty she hadn't seen in years. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, his voice low and respectful. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. Could you spare anything?" Olivia froze. There was no manipulation in his tone, no desperation, just quiet sincerity. His name, she would soon learn, was Jake Walker. Something about him was different. There was dignity in the way he stood and a strange familiarity in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached into her wallet and handed him several bills. Jake's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Olivia nodded silently, unable to explain why her heart was suddenly so full. She watched as he backed away, slowly clutching the money, and walked down the sidewalk with careful steps. Something in her shifted, something small but undeniable. As she sat back in her car, Olivia didn't immediately drive away. Her thoughts lingered on the man she had just met. He was nameless only moments ago, yet somehow felt more real than any of the men she had dated in years. No pretense, no polished persona, just quiet need and raw humanity. And strangely, it wasn't pity she felt. It was intrigue. That brief exchange in a place so far from the life she knew stirred something in her she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, compassion, and perhaps, though she wouldn't admit it yet, a quiet hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wondered if perhaps something real could still find its way into her life, just not from where she expected. The next morning, Olivia Carter awoke earlier than usual, her thoughts already consumed by the encounter from the day before. She had tried to go about her evening as normal, finished her emails, answered her mother's usual check-in call, even watched an episode of a design show, but nothing could push the image of that man from her mind. Jake Walker. There was something in his eyes, something gentle and unguarded, that lingered in her heart far longer than she expected. She didn't know what it was: pity, curiosity, admiration. All she knew was that it had been a long time since someone had made her feel anything. That morning, as she sipped her coffee and stared at the rising sun, Olivia felt a quiet nudge in her chest, telling her to return to that same fruit stand. She didn't even fight it. She just grabbed her coat and keys and left. When she arrived at the quiet roadside stall, the same elderly vendor gave her a knowing smile, as if she had expected her return. Olivia scanned the area and spotted him. Jake sitting under a tree, not far from the stand. He was facing away from the road, his posture upright, but still. As Olivia approached, she took note of how he didn't slouch or shift nervously. He simply sat watching the horizon, as though waiting for answers. Only silence could give gravel crunched beneath her heels as she stepped closer, and Jake turned his head, surprise flashing across his face when he saw her. He stood immediately, brushing imaginary dust from his worn jacket. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely, his voice steady but a little unsure. "I didn't expect to see you again." Olivia smiled softly. "It's Olivia. And honestly, I didn't expect to be here either." They talked for nearly an hour beneath that tree, the sun rising higher as morning melted into noon. Olivia asked about his life, and slowly, cautiously, Jake began to share pieces of it. He had grown up in a small rural town, the only child of parents who passed away when he was still in high school. With no extended family to lean on, he had moved to the city in search of work, only to be swept into a storm of bad luck, low wages, and temporary shelters. Through it all, he had survived. What struck Olivia most wasn't the sadness of his story. It was the way he told it. Without bitterness, without blame, just facts and lessons learned. And though his shoes were falling apart and his coat barely held together, Jake spoke with a quiet thoughtfulness that seemed to fill in every crack in his appearance. At one point, Olivia tilted her head and said softly, "You speak so well. I mean, you don't sound like someone who's been struggling to survive on the streets." Jake chuckled. "Not offended, I listen," he said simply. "When I pass by people talking at bus stops, cafes, libraries, I pay attention. I pick up how they use their words, how they explain things. Over time, I guess I just learned to speak the same way." Olivia was silent for a moment, struck by the honesty and humility in his voice. Here was a man who had lost so much, yet still chose to learn, still chose to grow. In a world full of polished liars and status-driven men, Jake Walker was something rare, unpolished truth. As their conversation continued, Olivia realized that she wasn't just talking to someone interesting, she was feeling something she hadn't felt in years: safe, engaged, grounded. With Jake, there were no games, no bravado, no carefully rehearsed stories designed to impress, just realness, just presence. And that more than anything made her heart soften. "Jake," she said, after a pause, her voice uncertain but hopeful, "I know this might sound odd, but would you mind if we became friends?" For a second, Jake blinked, unsure he had heard her correctly. "Friends," he repeated, his tone filled with surprise. Olivia nodded. "Yes, I think you're a good person, and I'd like to know more about you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I feel something real when I talk to you." Jake's expression shifted slowly from confusion to disbelief to a quiet, almost childlike gratitude. "No one's ever asked me that," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Not in a long, long time. Olivia smiled, and for the first time in weeks, maybe even months, she felt like herself again. Not the version of her who had to impress clients or fend off questions from her mother. Just Olivia. A woman. A heart reaching out to another human being with no agenda but connection. And as they sat together beneath the tree sharing stories, sharing silence, a new friendship quietly began to take root. One not built on status or surface, but something far deeper. Something that in time would change them both in ways neither of them could have predicted. The pressure had been building for weeks. Olivia Carter knew it was only a matter of time before her mother brought up the family reunion again with the same familiar tone of urgency and veiled disappointment. "You're 30? Olivia, 30. Do you know how many of your cousins already have children?" The words echoed in her head like a metronome ticking louder with each passing day. And now, with the reunion only 2 months away, the anxiety loomed like a thundercloud. Olivia had attended too many family gatherings alone, enduring endless questions and pitiful smiles from relatives who thought her career was a poor substitute for love. This time, she decided would be different. As ridiculous as it sounded, she needed a plan. Something dramatic enough to finally end the endless matchmaking and commentary. That's when her mind returned to Jake. The thought struck her like a sudden breeze, unexpected, strange, but oddly perfect. It took Olivia a full day to work up the courage to ask. She found Jake sitting at their usual spot beneath the tree near the fruit stand, sketching something in the dirt with a stick. When she sat down beside him, he greeted her with the same warmth that had become familiar. They talked for a while about nothing in particular before she finally took a deep breath and blurted it out. "Jake, I have a strange request." He raised an eyebrow, curious but calm. Olivia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There's a family reunion coming up. Everyone expects me to show up with a fiancé. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to pretend to be that person. Just for the weekend, or maybe 2 months, to make it believable I'd help you with everything. Clothes, appearance, even how to act around my family." Jake blinked clearly, stunned but not offended. "You want me, a homeless man, to pretend to be your future husband?" The silence between them lingered for a few beats before Olivia nodded. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I know how it sounds, but I trust you, Jake. And if you do this, I promise you'll be well taken care of. I'm not doing this for laughs. I just can't face another year of being ridiculed and pitied." Jake stared at her, processing the offer. Then slowly he nodded. "If it means that much to you, I'll do it." Olivia felt a surge of relief and gratitude. She smiled her heart light for the first time in days, and so the transformation began the next morning. Olivia drove Jake to a local salon tucked away in an upscale district. The staff gave him curious looks when they arrived, but she waved off their unspoken questions. Jake sat quietly as the barber trimmed his hair, shaped his beard, and washed away months of wear from his face. The change was startling. When he turned to face her in the mirror, Olivia gasped. "You look incredible." Jake shrugged shyly, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's just a haircut," but Olivia knew it wasn't. It was the beginning of something neither of them could fully define. From there, Olivia took Jake shopping for clothes. They visited several stores, each one more elegant than the last, picking out tailored jackets, fitted slacks, clean shoes, and even accessories. Jake seemed overwhelmed at first, but Olivia guided him gently, encouraging him with every small choice you'll need. "These," she said with a grin, "if you're going to convince anyone you're marrying an architect." As the days passed, the lessons began. Olivia coached him on table manners, posture, conversation cues, and how to handle awkward family questions. Jake listened carefully, absorbing every word. What struck Olivia wasn't just his willingness to learn, but the grace with which he did it. He never complained, never mocked the absurdity of the situation. Instead, he thanked her each night with a sincerity that softened her heart. Somewhere along the way, something shifted. What began as a bizarre agreement slowly turned into companionship. They cooked dinner together, laughed over breakfast, shared stories late into the night. Jake, once quiet and cautious, began to open up more. He spoke about the stars he used to watch as a child, his dreams of becoming a teacher, and the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow ever since he lost his parents. Olivia listened with an attentiveness she rarely offered anyone, and as she watched him help fold laundry or practice his greeting in the mirror, she felt something she hadn't planned for affection. Real, complicated affection. This wasn't just about the reunion anymore. Jake had become a presence in her life. She looked forward to someone who brought comfort without demanding attention. Someone who didn't see her as a title or a prize, but simply as Olivia. By the time the first week had passed, Olivia found herself lingering longer in the hallway outside Jake's room, listening to the sound of him humming softly as he practiced walking in his new shoes. She would lie in bed at night, replaying the small moments of connection, his laugh at one of her dry jokes, the way he helped the elderly neighbor carry groceries without being asked, how his eyes lit up when he finally tied a perfect Windsor knot. Her walls, carefully built over years of disappointment, were beginning to crumble, and Jake, unknowingly or not, was the one gently bringing them down. Olivia didn't know what the next 2 months would bring. But as she stood in the doorway, watching Jake fumble with a tie and mutter to himself, she smiled. Whatever this was turning into, it was already more real than any relationship she had ever known. The days that followed blurred into something gentle, almost dreamlike. What began as practice, an elaborate performance to fool Olivia's family, slowly morphed into something much more difficult to define. Olivia found herself lingering longer at the breakfast table, with Jake laughing at jokes that weren't rehearsed, sharing quiet smiles over coffee that weren't part of the script. Their conversations drifted beyond etiquette lessons and family dynamics. They talked about memories, hopes, and regrets. Jake told her about the books he used to read under the flickering lights of bus terminals, and Olivia confessed that some nights, even in her luxurious condo, she still felt alone. Somewhere along the line, rehearsed affection gave way to real emotion. What was supposed to be staged hand-holding during practice dinners became a touch Olivia looked forward to. A light brush of his hand on her back sent her heart fluttering in a way she hadn't experienced in years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and bathed Olivia's living room in amber light, they sat on the couch side by side, their shoulders just barely touching. A comfortable silence enveloped them, broken only by the soft hum of jazz playing from the speaker. Olivia turned to Jake and smiled, her eyes searching his face. "You know," she said quietly, "when I asked you to do this, I never imagined I'd feel this." Jake looked at her, his expression calm but open, vulnerable, in a way that made Olivia's throat tighten. "I didn't either," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you've given me something I thought I'd lost the right to even dream about. A place, a purpose." And he paused, then added with trembling honesty, "A person I care about." Olivia didn't respond with words. She leaned in slowly, her heart pounding. And when their lips finally met, the kiss was soft, unhurried, like a breath held too long, finally released. In that moment, everything felt real, not borrowed, not pretend, just real. The next day, Olivia shared the moment with her best friend Emma, expecting a mix of surprise and curiosity, but what she received instead was skepticism and caution. "Olivia, are you seriously getting emotionally involved with this man? You don't know anything about his past. He was homeless. He could be lying, playing a long game. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but don't you think this is dangerous?" Emma's words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they came from concern. Olivia took a breath, steadying her voice before responding. "Jake has shown me more honesty and integrity than any of the men I've dated. He didn't walk into my life asking for anything. He's given me trust, respect, and space to be myself. I don't care about where he came from." I care about who he is." Now Emma fell silent, still wary, but visibly moved by Olivia's conviction. The doubts didn't stop there. That evening, Olivia received a call from Mark Ellis, the same man who had humiliated her on their date weeks ago. His voice dripped with sarcasm. "So you're playing fairy tale with a charity case. Now I saw you in that fancy boutique with him. You really think some street guy can become your Prince Charming?" Olivia's jaw clenched, but she refused to let his words wound her. "At least Jake isn't a liar," she snapped. "He doesn't pretend to be someone he's not. He's kind, he listens, and he's not married behind my back. That puts him leagues above you, Mark." The line went quiet for a moment before he laughed mockingly, but Olivia didn't wait for a comeback. She hung up her chest, rising and falling with emotion. She wasn't angry. She was certain, and it felt good to defend someone who truly deserved it. Later that night, Olivia stood in the hallway outside Jake's room, unsure why her hand hesitated on the doorframe. When she finally knocked and stepped inside, he looked up from the book he was reading. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, stepping in slowly. "You ever feel like everyone expects you to explain your happiness?" Jake smiled softly. "Yeah, especially when it comes from something they don't understand." Olivia sat beside him, brushing her hair behind her ear. I never expected this. I don't even know what this is yet, but it's the first time in years I've felt like I can just be with someone. No pressure, no expectations, just peace." Jake closed his book and reached out to gently hold her hand. "Then let's not define it. Let's just live it." In the quiet that followed, Olivia realized how much she had changed. She no longer scrutinized Jake's past or questioned whether he belonged in her world. She felt understood, seen valued, not for her job title, her bank account, or her social circle, but for her laughter, her vulnerability, her truth. Jake made her feel safe in a way no polished suitor ever had, and as they sat there hand in hand, the noise of the world faded away. It didn't matter what others thought. It didn't matter what doubts crept in from the outside. What mattered was the connection growing steadily between them, quiet, real, and undeniably profound. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when Olivia and Jake stepped into the small boutique jewelry store tucked between two towering office buildings downtown. The air inside smelled of cedarwood and velvet, the walls lined with display cases glowing softly under warm lights. Olivia had chosen this place because it wasn't flashy or overcrowded. She didn't want a spectacle. This wasn't a real engagement after all, just a performance for her family. They needed something believable, elegant but not extravagant. Yet as she looked around, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were doing. What had started as a favor was now woven into the most intimate parts of her daily life. Every glance, every touch between them lately felt less like acting and more like memory in the making. Still, she reminded herself of the purpose. One ring, one illusion, and they'd get through the reunion. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile greeted them, introducing herself simply as Diane. Looking for something specific today, she asked Olivia. Hesitated, glancing toward Jake before answering. Something simple, elegant. Nothing too flashy. Diane nodded and led them to a section near the back, where more understated designs were displayed, delicate gold bands, modest stones, and classic cuts. Olivia picked up a thin silver ring and turned it in her fingers, but something didn't feel right. Jake stood quietly beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, observing rather than participating. Diane noticed Olivia's uncertainty and excused herself for a moment. When she returned, she was holding a small velvet box. "I think you might like this one," she said, opening it slowly. Inside was a diamond ring that shimmered so brightly it caught both Olivia and Jake off guard. The stone was flawless, held in a vintage-inspired setting that looked like it had a story of its own. Olivia blinked in disbelief. "This is beautiful, but it's far beyond our budget." Diane smiled gently and placed the box on the counter. "It's already been paid for," she said. "It's yours." The silence that followed was thick with confusion. Paid for Jake echoed by who? Diane simply shrugged. The benefactor wishes to remain anonymous. They asked for it to be given to a couple who walks in with kindness in their eyes. I was told I'd know them when I saw them. Olivia looked down at the ring heart, pounding. A dozen questions spun through her mind. Was this a mistake? A joke? Some strange marketing ploy? But Diane's tone held no deceit, only sincerity. Jake looked at her, his gaze calm and steady. Maybe it's a sign, he said softly. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained. They're just meant to be accepted. They left the store with the ring in a small black box, the weight of it heavier than Olivia had anticipated, not physically but emotionally. In the car, she opened the box again and held the ring up to the light. It glinted like starlight, flawless, eternal. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "Why us?" Jake, sitting beside her, reached out and placed a hand over hers. "Why not us?" he asked gently. "We've both spent our lives wondering if we deserve good things. Maybe this time the answer is yes." Olivia met his gaze, her throat tight. This wasn't about the ring anymore. It was about the man sitting next to her. The man who had walked into her life with nothing, and in doing so, gave her everything she didn't know. She needed peace, respect, and something heartbreak had stolen from her long-ago hope. Back at her apartment, Olivia sat on the sofa, the box resting in her lap. Jake brewed tea in the kitchen, moving with the quiet confidence that had become second nature to him. She watched him as he poured the water and stirred the cups not with obligation, but with care. Her thoughts drifted back to the day they met, how ragged he had looked, how lost he had seemed. And yet he had carried himself with a strength most people with money and power lacked. She thought about the way he listened, the way he never interrupted, the way his presence calmed her mind without effort. The ring sparkled in her hand, but her eyes were focused on Jake. He had given her something that no diamond ever could, the freedom to be soft in a world that demanded hardness. Later that night, Olivia held the ring once more before placing it into the drawer beside her bed. She knew they still had a role to play for the reunion, still had to dress the part of a couple in love, but a quiet truth was growing in her heart, blooming with every glance Jake gave her, every moment of comfort they shared. This wasn't pretend anymore, not entirely. Something real had slipped between the lines as naturally as breath. She didn't know who the anonymous benefactor was or why the ring had found its way to them, but as she lay back on her pillow, Jake's laughter floating softly from the other room, she realized something profound. Her heart hadn't been changed by status charm or wealth. It had been transformed by a man who once had nothing but dignity and chose to give her the one thing she thought she'd never find again: unconditional, quiet love. If this story moved you, we invite you to join our journey at Deep Inside HQ, where we explore the hidden truths behind ordinary moments and reveal the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video if it touched your heart, and share it with someone who still believes in the power of second chances and unexpected love. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that dives deep into what truly matters: kindness, connection, and the courage to feel.